Welcome to this behind the scenes featurette on Women of Independence. My name is Paul Hayes, I'm the director of the show, and you join us here in An Táin Arts Centre, Dundalk. You can see the filming is taking place just over my left hand shoulder. So over the next few minutes you'll get to meet some of the cast and hear a little bit about the context of how this play came to be. Women of Independence is part 2 of the Remembrance Trilogy. Back in 2015, Upstate Theatre Project in Drogheda and An Táin Arts Centre in Dundalk came together to look at the 3 significant events on the decade of Centenaries. First in 1916 was the Easter Rising, and we put a play together called Easter Service, and we did that in 2016. This show is looking at the War of Independence. Was meant to be done about a year and a half ago, but due to COVID, we had to change our plan numerous times. So the plan we came up with was that we wouldn't be able to do a full production live for a theatre audience. So we have filmed the production, and that's what you're going to see tonight.
My name is Nicola Devine. I'm playing Mary Kate Harte in Women of Independence. I've really enjoyed discovering more about Mary Kate Harte. Her family owned a pub here in Dundalk, just down from the An Táin Arts Centre actually, and her 2 brothers were shot dead just outside the pub. So you walk around the town of Dundalk many times, but you may not know the history behind the little plaques that are on walls, or how streets are named or who they're named for, and it kind of brings it all home. So I really enjoy discovering the history behind places around Dundalk. It's something I probably wouldn't have done otherwise.
I'm Anya, and I played Deirdre Spillane in the Women of Independence. I got involved in the Women of Independence I was in the trilogy of Easter Service back about 6 years ago, and Paul Hayes actually got in contact with me. He emailed everyone that was involved, and I was very interested, so I emailed back, obviously. Thankfully, I got it, which I was very happy about. And from then, we've been rehearsing for a good few months. So the last week of filming was in the Town Hall in Dundalk, and it's a very different experience to theatre. It's a completely different atmosphere than being on stage in front of an audience. It's been a great experience, and I've truly loved it.
Because of COVID, we had to change the way we normally work on a community-led theatre piece. We couldn't bring in lots of people. We had to work with people that we'd worked with before. We lost a bit in that, because normally you'd bring loads of people, open door policy, into a room, and you would just have some research and you would start from there, and whatever happened in the room would happen and you'd make a play out of it. This time we got a researcher, Niall O'Brien, to research the stories of the time, but we knew we wouldn't be able to go into a workshop programme, so instead we gave that research to a local writer, Conor McGinty, who turned it into the play that you'll see this evening. We then cast that from 4 community actors who we've worked with numerous times in the past, and started about 6 months ago, very tentatively over Zoom, rehearsing the play. It's not exactly how I would like to do it, but then eventually when restrictions lifted, we were able to get into the room, and you'll see what came out of it after this.
My name is Bianca Brown. I'm playing Máire Fitzpatrick in Women of Independence. I previously did the production of Easter Service for the Easter Rising Commemorations. So when the Women of Independence came up, I kind of thought it was a natural kind of progression to do this stage of it. But obviously due to COVID, this situation has been quite different, because it's on film rather than here on the stage live. So that whole process has been very different, but also quite rewarding, and you're learning new skills. Where you normally you're playing to an audience, and it's live, and the reactions and are coming back straight away. Where in a film, it's a different process, but because you don't have that live reaction, you can kind of get more chance to kind of be more subtle about your performance, and you can obviously have a few times to kind of do it rather than just the one time to do it.
My name is Carmel Ennis and I'm playing the character of Máire Lee-Wilson in this production. So I think what's interesting about Máire Lee-Wilson for me was that she's actually the woman who brought the Caravaggio to Ireland. If Máire Lee-Wilson hadn't been around and if her story hadn't happened, there would be no Caravaggio hanging in the National Gallery, and that's something a lot of people would know, even people who are aware of the history of the Caravaggio piece, The Taking of Christ. This is the first time I have done something like this in terms of film, or in terms of a monologue to film in this way. But I think what's been interesting for me in lots of ways is that it has brought, I'm not usually overly interested in historical events. I don't know that I had to get over fears, but it was a very different process than anything I'd be used to. Yeah, that thing of maybe learning a full monologue, of actually really feeling it though, and like that no matter how many times you went over it, I suppose wanting to do justice to the person really was actually the main thing for me. I think I was really drawn by her in the beginning, that this was a love story really, and it just made me think about all the people who find themselves on wrong sides, right sides in wars, and how ordinary love is going on all the time anyway. And not everybody falls in love with heroes, that sometimes people fall in love with people who, you know, have weak sides or have done terrible things, or so I think that was what was really interesting. And also what was interesting for me was that she went on to have a complete other life afterwards.
The intention with the whole trilogy was to re-examine these events in Ireland 100 years later, not to commemorate them, but to artistically look again at what the aftermath was for Ireland in the 100 years since. With this one, Women of Independence, we particularly, having looked at the research, wanted to tell women's stories from this region. We found testimonies of women whose loved ones were killed during this time, and we wanted to tell their stories. We also wanted to tell both sides of the story. We'd had a lot of research into Irish women whose loved ones were killed during this time, but we also wanted to show the other side. So we do have one woman's story in this whose loved one was killed by the Irish side. We thought it was important to show both sides of the story.
It was lovely actually getting back to do something after being locked down with the COVID pandemic for so long. And I love community theatre in that you get to meet a whole range of different people. People that you might walk past in the street and never get to know otherwise. So it's always a lovely experience, and you get to face your fears, and probably in a safe environment in that everybody's very supportive. We're all here just to enjoy ourselves, let the inner child out a little bit, and it's been lovely.
I suppose what I love about the whole community theatre thing is how much welly everybody gives it when they're there, and yet you're very much, you're still quite private, like, but you're so much together when you're there in that community and giving and doing something together. And I really felt this is a remarkable group of women to work with. I really enjoyed every minute of it.
Okay, so that's it. You've heard from me and you've heard from the actors. Sit back. The only way to watch this, if you're watching this at home, is to turn off the lights, turn off the phone, have no distractions, and watch it as if you're in the theatre. And we really hope you enjoy.
eyes view
Deirdre Spillane is my name, my married name. I was Tierney before. My brother Pat was a quartermaster in the IRA during the War of Independence. Funds and supplies, that's what he did really. We lived on Tisdale Street in Ardee. I knew there was something brewing, something big coming. There was lads in and out of the house for weeks. I wanted to do something, but of course Pat wouldn't hear tell of it. I could have spied, gathered information, helped the cause. They wouldn't have suspected a quiet woman. He just laughed, told me to get the tea. So I got the tea, but I kept an eye out. There was a lad I knew from about that kept coming over. Strange to see him, as he was an RIC man. Grant his name was. Turns out he was the good kind of RIC man, one who was only in it for the money and a bit of protection. There was a plan to have a go at the RIC barracks in Ardee. I couldn't believe it. Imagine that. My brother. That would have been some act. We would have been the toast of the town. No more that Deirdre Fitzgerald looking down her long nose at me. Her brother might be the football star, but mine would catch the tans with their trousers down. There wasn't much going on in Ardee, or even Louth at that stage, to be honest. They had a tight grip of us, in fairness. Had us by the neck and kept a good hold, but they were complacent in ways. This is a small county, a few big towns, Dundalk, Drogheda and Ardee. They could keep the towns in check a lot easier than they could the country, keep things ticking over. Jobs for the locals, fancy things in the market shelves, dances every fortnight, work for the men, dates and uniform for the women. The British Army kept the breweries and the livery stables and the hotels and all the other businesses going, sure. They were great fellas. And for those of us that weren't happy, who dared put a toe out of line, there were patrols driving around, men on foot, on horseback, always armed. And if the carrot didn't work, there was always the stick. And don't you forget it. The plan was hatched in September. Gone were the late night meetings, the lads passing each other quick messages and quicker signals on the street corners. I'd heard them arguing up in Pat's room about how they'd show it was safe to meet. They'd light up a cigarette, shake the match twice, and kick it. Someone else wanted to put the cigarette behind her ear, and then toss the matches from the right hand to the left. I was coming in with the tea then, and I said, "Why don't you do nothing if it's safe and stand out in the street if it's not?" They went with that then. Idiots. 2 weeks, lads. We'll move in 2 weeks. 10 days, then a week. I remember being excited. I can't imagine how they felt. Pat was pale in the days leading up to the attack. He could barely eat. I like to think I kept him on track, kept reminding him that this was good work, was the right thing to do. Then, the day before it was due to happen, it was called off. Word was sent down from above. Stand down, lads. There was a leak. Someone said something to the wrong man. Some Judas. Whoever it was has never come forward. It was likely taken to the grave. Was it by accident or on purpose? It was a terrible thing, no matter what the circumstance. It was a terrible, cowardly thing.
My name is Máire Fitzpatrick, sister of Sean Moore, who was on the run up in Drogheda. I heard a story about the shopkeeper up there who woke up one night to find 10 black and tans breaking in through his front window. Cody, he was called, a general clothing and haberdashery merchant. The army needed new rig-outs, and hearing this was the place to go, they waited until the dead of night to break in. The whole place was cleaned out of men's fashions, and when it came up in court, he didn't even get 1/3 of the value back. You see, that's the kind of place they have up there in Drogheda. The army can do what they want, consequences be damned. Take what they want, do what they want. It's not right, can't be right. He was a new father, Sean, a baby girl. Máire, only born in May. Bit like Moira, I used to say, named after me. She was a summer child, never knew anything but happy days and sunbeams. He and his wife Bridget just doted on that child. We were a proud Wexford family, a Republican family. My father kept a little shop, so there was always boxes of stock that could be made into a great hiding place. He kept a few revolvers one time that he put into a box marked for Lister sanitary towels. The tans came in tearing the place apart, but as soon as Mammy told them what was in the box, they dropped it like a hot coal. It's a good thing none of them went off. But the word got out somehow. Someone said something to someone they shouldn't have. We were the most searched premises in town. Daddy used to say he'd start leaving packages in the corner that needed a good dung out, let them do the lifting. They had women in to search me and Mammy and the girls. They weren't local. The English had them bussed in from elsewhere, gave them their 30 pieces. But if they had been known, they would have been scalped and made very familiar with the hollow end of a revolver. They started taking Daddy then, parading him through town. "I'm off me walk. Mind the shop," he'd say, taking his hat, letting on like it was a great bit of fun. That was the first few times. But then it got worse. Rifles in the back, boots up the side. They made him keep up an awful pace. They'd have him out for hours, spitting at him, screaming. The things they used to shout when people went by. Shaming him, disgracing him, trying to drag him down and break him. Sticks and stones, he'd tell me. But I knew it was heavy. I knew by the square of his shoulders. Whatever they did to him, Sean would do back to them twice over. See, that was always his problem. Mess at me all you want, but touch my family, summon the curate and say your prayers. Sean.
We were a business family in Dundalk, the Windmill Bar in Seatown. That was our patch. Yeah, things were going well, the till was ticking over, we'd a steady flow of regulars. Things were coming back to normal after Daddy died. Poor Mammy. Been awful hard on her. And the crowd of us didn't help. There were 5 of us and a business to keep an eye on. My sister had the 2 kids, so she wasn't much good to anyone. It was the boys that were running the show. I was actually only home on a visit. I was barely in the door and I was given a list of jobs to do. "Mary Kate, do this, go there, get more of that when you get a chance. Thanks, Mary Kate." Bernard was the food man. Patrick kept an eye on the drinks and John looked after the tills. They were a good team. The Windmill Gang, they used to call themselves. They used to go on about kegs being killed and rubbish having to be buried. Carrying on like gangsters. Didn't mean anything though. It was just a bit of fun. They were too busy to get caught up in anything serious. Now they had their sympathies, of course, and they'd give a free pint to any man who they thought might be struggling. But they themselves, they'd a business to run. The boys used to love sitting along the river wall, legs dangling over, throwing bits of scraps to the ducks. That's where they bring their sweethearts when they got a bit older. I think they liked to show them they were men of means, but had a tender side as well. Don't know who came up with that plan, but I have to say it was a good one. The lads stayed at home and minded their own business that night. After tea, they went into the back garden and pitched a few horseshoes, and then they weeded Mammy's flower beds. There was an RIC man killed in Dundalk that night, up in Dowdall's Hill. Campbell was the fella's name. Scottish, temporary constable, whatever that means. Part-time tyrant. I know. God love his family. Well, I don't know if he had a wife or kids, but it's tough for them if he had. Still, though, it was a war, and he was on the wrong side. He was marked out and shot at as he went about his business. Now, some might say that's a bit cowardly, but that's the way it had to be done. The IRA didn't have the same manpower, weapons, or training even. They had to take their chances while they could, hit fast and disappear into the darkness. 17th of June, 1921. It was a nice night. Bit of a breeze. Didn't ever seem to get fully dark. Maybe that was it now that I think of it. If it had been a winter's night, he could have lain there undiscovered until late morning. Then they might have had to change tactic.
My husband, Percival Lee-Wilson. Percy, to me, was in the RIC. He was a district inspector. He'd been a captain in the British Army during World War I, but was sent home wounded. He used to joke when I'd worry about his job. Marie, I've retired from the real action. This RIC lark is just a stroll around the countryside. It was like joining the civil service at that stage. A good job, a secure job. The Royal Irish Constabulary. Nothing royal about Ireland anyway. That was their point, I think, and they were very keen that we all understood it. Michael Collins said that he never did anything for vengeance, that any man with vengeance in his heart was not fit to be a volunteer. You had to be cold, dispassionate, just a soldier carrying out your orders. Routine, machine. Isn't that what Percy was doing? Yes, I know he got a bit carried away. Emotions were running high that day. Perhaps his experiences from the war were coming back to him. Any excuse to play soldier. He used to waken some nights in a cold sweat, muscles rock hard like tight cords round his body. I'd beg him then, "What's wrong? What happened? What did you see?" Most of the time he'd say nothing, just go downstairs for a cup of warm milk. But sometimes he'd just say he was back there. Then he'd hold me tight and we'd sleep again. There was no other choice for him, really. His father was a wealthy stockbroker. His grandfather had been Mayor of London, so they were a prestigious family. Percy went to Oxford, but the world of books in the mind wasn't the one he was most comfortable in. I always felt he had to get away, do his own thing. He was a man of action, liked to get his hands dirty, not sit behind a desk, make his living with a pencil. Was that it? Was that what drove him that Easter Sunday? Perhaps he felt this country, his new home, was ordered and controlled in part by him, and when the rebels made their stand, it felt like a challenge to something, everything he was, everything he stood for. Perhaps he could see his father and grandfather standing over him. Not good enough, Percy. One must do better. Frustration of his wound wouldn't have helped either. He wasn't fit to fight at the front, so he brought the front with him. Percy was put in charge of the prisoners after the rising and gathered them outside the Rotunda Hospital. Collins was there, and MacDermott, and Clark, most of the signatories. Sean Moran too. The thing with Clark was the worst. He was an old man at that stage, near 60. I'm ashamed to say it, but Parsifal forced him to strip naked in front of all those other men and the nursing staff. He berated him then. Look at this. Look at him. This is your general. This tobacco merchant. He laughed at him. Michael Collins said it was never about revenge. Why did he send the squad then, years later?
I'll never forget that night, freezing cold. We were all home and in bed early. Martin, my other brother, had extra logs in the fire on all day, so the house was cosy. Pat was only coming around these past few days. He'd been in the worst of form when the operation was called off. I think he was secretly glad it had been taken out of his hands though. There was rumblings on the street, nothing concrete in mind, but there was talk that Pat Tierney from Tisdale Street was going to step up and strike a blow. The girls all looked at him differently now. He was a serious prospect, a whiff of danger to him. We all love a bit of a bad boy. It was only that last week or two starting to hold his head up again. God. He had no chance, no life at all. There was so much more for him to see, to do. He'd often talk about heading away off on his travels, off to seek his fortune. He'd come back with a pot of jewels and an Arabian prince for me. That's what he'd say. He was 26, a grown man but a young boy still, in a lot of ways. When I think of 26-year-olds, I think a young fella settling down, starting to work, families on the horizon. Poor Pat. We were all asleep in bed when day came. A thunder against the front door. Around midnight, I reckon. It was a clear night, moon straight overhead. I looked out and could see them. 5 men, black soles and tan boots. My heart stopped and my eyes closed. Please, God, please, let them have the wrong house. Open up or we'll burn this house down. My father knew not to call him on that, so he opened up. Rifle straight in his face, pushed back against the wall, the holy waterfront smashed, pieces on the floor. Where are they? Who? Martin and Patrick. Martin? What did you want with Martin? Martin never said boo. Patrick was the one. But Patrick didn't even do anything. I could hear the boys come down the stairs. They had their boots and their good coats on. I went after them, but my mother held me back. There was silence in the hall downstairs as they took them out. Stay in this house, all of you, or you'll be shot. They went outside and down the way a little bit. I could hear voices, them asking, Pat and Martin answering, Martin quieter, yes sir, no sir. Pat would make them work for it. The door opened again and Martin was thrown in, gun pointed. Stay inside, I mean it. I heard footsteps then. They didn't want to do it in front of the house. Was that decent? I don't know. They had mothers too. Then a shot. And another. And another. Martin knew straight away. He huddled into my mother like a hurt child. My father didn't say anything, he just watched the door and I watched him. A few minutes went by and we heard a vehicle speed off. Then he went out to his son. I went after him, but my mother held me back, begged me not to, even ripped my dress. My father was standing over two small heaps of clothes down the road. Did they take him? Is he gone? That's him. Couldn't be. They beat him first. Broke his arms and legs. They were twisted behind his back, so you couldn't even see them. They'd shot him in the head, so most of his brains and skull were blown out all over the verge behind him. Either before or after that, they'd opened up his stomach with a bayonet. My father went back to the house for a tin or something to scrape his brains and bits into. The curate and a few others heard the shots and came out. Dr. Steen and Nurse Cummins came next. They patched him up as best they could. I felt like I was floating outside myself. I'll never forget it. I'll never forget the whiskey bottles cast into the ditch beside my brother's body either. The Tans had been in a night out. I hope they enjoyed themselves.
Sean was on the run. He was sleeping somewhere outside of Drogheda. Bridget and Maura were in the town keeping their head down. An RIC man had been killed locally, a district inspector, one of the many heads of the beast. We never asked if Sean had anything to do with it, but he was a man of action. I wouldn't have been surprised. He was popping in to say goodnight to the girls when he was taken. He was a softie underneath it all. Always had to get a little kiss before he went off. He would have been like a tiger when they burst in, protective of his own. I can see him now, telling them how it was going to be. Walk back out that door now, boys, and I'll come quietly with you. Make a sound, waken that child, and I'll show you something. Probably sent a gang from heavily armoured, the hardest lads they could find. They needed their pea shooters and mismatched armour before they went near a true warrior. They told Bridget he was under arrest, to take his breakfast to the barracks in the morning. Not the child, though, just the breakfast. So she did. It was Ash Wednesday morning. Started Christ suffering, funnily enough. We were just back from Mass. Daddy had opened the shop shutters in defiance and then closed them again. We're all over the place. And then Father Brown arrived. He didn't want his tea, no stories, no news or gossip that he shouldn't be telling us at all. Sean has been murdered by the Black and Tans in Drogheda. My mother didn't cry. She just wanted to know if he'd been spied out or informed on. Her blood runs green. Daddy and I went up there to bring him home. They'd left him out in a shed in the back of the barracks. Sean and another man, Tom, helping. A Sinn Féin official who'd never laid a finger on anyone. They'd been beaten black and blue. Limbs broken. Shattered men. It took us a minute or two to realise which one was Sean. We gathered him up and we took him home. Don't let them see you cry, he used to say. And we didn't. Neither of us did. And the Tans wouldn't even let us have a decent funeral for him. Too dangerous, one of them told Liam. Too dangerous? Were they afraid of him rising from the dead? Everybody came out of their houses. The whole town closed down. I could hear the Tans grumbling as we went by. They couldn't get a bit to eat or drink the whole day. Sean would have loved that.
The first I heard of it was Mammy's voice asking what they want, who they were. There's something in you, I think. If your mammy is scared about something, your body reacts. You stiffen up and get that sour taste in your mouth. Just didn't feel right. There was nothing I could put my finger on, and God knows there was nothing I could do. I never heard them come in, that's the funny thing. You know, if there'd been a knock on the door or they'd forced it or anything like that, I would have heard. I'm a light sleeper the best of times. They had a key. Mammy said that after. It's the only way to explain it. How did they get a key? Well, they must have stolen it or made a copy somehow. They did something underhand to get it anyway, I'm sure of that. Mammy heard him coming up the stairs and went out. He nearly came in on top of her, the black and tan. Bernard, where's Bernard? He kept asking. Sure, Mammy didn't know what was going on, so she led him straight to her son. Did Judas know what would happen? I think that's what dulled the boy's senses a bit, you know. Here's Mammy bringing this man to me, so it has to be all right. I don't think it would have happened if Daddy'd been around. A man knows the mind of another man, can feel the temper in him. He would have known straight away and pushed back, sounded the alarm. Maybe there would have been a big fight and we all might have been killed. Anyway, Bernard came out and went downstairs in his undershirt and bare feet. I was looking out the window at this stage. When he saw the gang outside and the rifles barely concealed, he knew there was something up. He made his excuse to go in and put his boots on, so they let him back inside, and I heard the rasp of the back window as he escaped into Seatown. They took the other two lads out then, Paddy and Johnny. They pushed them out onto the street, barefoot and still half asleep. Mammy tried to stop this, to hold on to them, but they put her back in the house. They marched them around by the river wall. I could still see them out the window. When they passed the halfway point, they stopped and formed up. John and Patrick kept walking. They didn't know. Then they shot them. 6 shots, 3 each. The Tans just walked on past their bodies when they'd finished and down Quay Street and round towards the barracks. I think I heard 1 or 2 of them laugh. I ran out straight away when it happened, and Mammy was there already. We knew there was nothing that could be done, so she went round to the Redemptorist and brought back 2 priests to give them the last rites. A few of the neighbours came out as well. It's all a blur. I can barely recollect. But I do remember some of the men lifting them up onto their shoulders and carrying them back to the house. We put them into bed. The sheets were still warm.
I sent him off that morning with a kiss like any other. Now that I think of it, there was a fella passing the house just then. Did he glance up? We lived about a quarter of a mile outside Gorey. Quiet enough road. Percy would go in and get his mail from the train, as well as the paper. Then he'd read on his way home for breakfast. I was going to do poached eggs that morning. I'd just gotten a nice half dozen the day before. Big ones. The June weather was helping them lay. He'd send his sergeant sometimes for the post if he had a hangover. I was the one who asked him to leave off the drink that night. I wanted to get to bed early. Perhaps if I'd left him with his whiskey. I don't think that would have made much difference, though. They were persistent, meticulous. If they hadn't gotten him that day, they would have tried the next, and the next, and the next. He was on his way back when they saw him. 4 men had the bonnet of a car up and were in off the Ballycanoe road. Percy had his head stuck in the paper. Some reports had him reading the Irish Independent. But that's just a bit of fanciful irony. The Irish Times was his paper. Did I show them who he was? Mark him out with that kiss? I kissed him like that the first time we stepped off the train at home. My mother took me aside later and told me it wouldn't end well, him being who he was and what he did and all that. That first time in Galway, they didn't know what to say to him. Daddy tried, but there wasn't much to talk about. That's what I liked about him, though. He was different. Everything about our relationship was exciting and new. I felt like I was in another world. They knew it was him when they saw him coming. Maybe they got excited because they opened fire straight away. 2 first, 1 in the shoulder. He stumbled but got up again and started to run. That's when they all started shooting. 12, the report said. There was another man had 12. The last one did the real damage, though. They walked over to his still shaking body and put a bullet in his head. I'd often asked him when they started carrying out these killings, "What about you? What if they come here?" He'd always laugh me off, though. What would they want with me? I'm a policeman in a quiet town. What would be the benefit? They'll conduct themselves like an army, a military unit. I know how that works. They'll be concentrating on getting the biggest hits they can land. Then he'd give me a kiss and smile and go back to his paper. I'm safe. We're safe.
After that night, I joined Commemorations. There was nothing going to stop me from joining the fight and avenging my brother's death. Revenge wasn't the main objective for me though. I wanted to pick up the mantle that had been dropped, but every action was another strike against the establishment, and maybe another strike against the men who had taken so much from my family. We buried him next to my grandparents in Bellapusta, near Ardee. My family have been in the same grave plot since 1858. Sean O'Carroll was taken that night as well. He was the one who was in touch with the boy in the RIC. He wouldn't have squealed, but maybe it was someone close to him. Another local lad, Jimmy Farley, he was in the GPO back in 1916 and Frongo for his troubles afterwards. He heard them coming and knew what was afoot. He escaped out the back window and down the railway line. If only my Pat had that foresight. 17 women joined up with me. They all had brothers and fathers and husbands that could be at risk. We spent our time putting on dances, concerts and anything we could think of to raise a few pounds for the lads on the run, doing our bit as best we could. I did help. I was well thought of. I took first aid courses to aid the wounded and attended meetings all over the country. They gave me dispatches, both Commemorations and the IRA. I was trusted with secret messages. There was an all-Ireland meeting of Commemorations called in the Mansion House after the treaty was signed. I was there. I was there when the Garden of Remembrance opened in 1970. I stayed in Ardee for the rest of my life, in the same place. But it's not Tisdale Street anymore. It's Tierney Street, named for my brother, for his sacrifice. He fought and died for us to be recognised as a country. Many more did. How many more? Thousands? Was it worth it?
We all knew what happened to my brother Sean Moran and Alderman Tom Halpin. They'd been murdered by the Black and Tans. Sean's wife even said as much after the fact. The men that came that night had English accents. Some of them wore masks and handkerchiefs like they were afraid of catching something. Cowards. There was an RIC man up in Dundalk who said the two lads had been shot by the IRA for refusing to obey orders. Sure, that doesn't make any sense. Sean asked how high when the word came down to jump. He gave his life for the cause. For them to suggest it was something else, to not even have the decency to take the responsibility, that's another low. Sean was a soldier. No, he didn't have a uniform or formal training, but this was a war. He died a hero's death, a soldier's death. It's not every man they send a heavily armed gang for. They knew who he was and what he was capable of. Tom Halpin was a politician though. His brand of resistance and struggle was through laws and speeches, not the gun. For them to take him as well, for them to equate a political man with a soldier, it's a corruption of the natural order of things. Louth wasn't really much of a Republican stronghold in the 1920s. They've made up for it since then though. The English had to run the place back then and they were made more than welcome. I think there were plans to step things up. More attacks, more strikes at legitimate targets. The British Army got wind of this and decided to make an example out of my brother and a few others. String them up and point them out. That's what happens when you step out of line. The Tans thought that by cutting down some of the taller crop, that they'd leave the IRA without leadership or direction. Maybe teach some of the young lads that this wasn't the path to follow. They thought that by showing savagery and setting the limits of what they were capable of, they'd quell the violence on this land and cow us into submission. I'm sorry to say for both sides that they were dead wrong.
There was a court inquiry after. There had to be. There was a bit of money set aside from Daddy's insurance, and Mammy was determined to see justice for her boys. The judge asked her if she had any inkling that something bad was going to happen. Sure, no, she didn't, and they went along with it. They didn't either. The court wanted to know how they got in. Was there a bolt or chain on the door? No, only a latch, and that hadn't been opened all day. They used a key then? Maybe a friend gave it to them. Well, they did, but a friend wouldn't have had it. No one did. The boys went through the pub upstairs that day. That front door was rarely used. They didn't leave the premises after tea time that evening. There's just no way they could have been involved in that murder out in Dowdall's Hill. No way at all. I saw them with my own eyes out, laughing and messing that summer's evening. Patrick had the bright idea of tossing a horseshoe between his legs, with his back turned. Nearly took my head off as I was bringing out the lemonade. They asked us all the same questions. Mammy, me, and Bernard. Did we think anything was going to happen? How did they get in? Was there trouble before? Were you in trouble previously? Did men often come looking for your brothers? Are you sure there wasn't going to be any trouble? John and Patrick weren't members of the IRA. They weren't soldiers. Yes, blood was spilled, something terrible happened, and in order to mark the cards of the local brigade, the Black and Tans very carefully and very deliberately marked out a set of prominent businessmen. They knew the lie of the land. They knew my father wasn't around anymore. They knew the windmill was a popular spot. They wanted to take my brothers out and kill them. They wanted to destroy a business, destroy a family, and strike fear into the hearts of the people of Dundalk with an excessive show of force. You put a scratch on us, we'll blow your house down. That was their idea. An eye for an eye and the whole world goes blind. We were blinded for a long time. Some of us still are. Was Judas blind what would happen after Gethsemane? I think he knew deep down what would happen. What one action would lead to.
I went away for a while after it happened. I think I was lost. I didn't know what to do with myself. I couldn't go back home. Couldn't deal with the looks and the judgment. What did she expect marrying a British officer? And sure, wasn't he an awful man? Look at the things he did. Brought our heroes low. Wasn't it quick? Wasn't it good enough for him? I was in Scotland for a time. I stayed with a friend and she brought me to an auction house to take my mind off things. They were selling off what I thought was a copy of Caravaggio's The Taking of Christ. There was something about it. A simple act of a kiss leading to so much suffering that captured me. I'd raised my hand even before I knew it. It was much too expensive. No one else seemed to be interested, so I ended up taking it. Britain didn't feel like home to me. At the end of the day, I was an Irish woman. I get strange looks in shops and restaurants when they heard me speak. What are you doing here? Everywhere I went, there were haircuts and accents and names like Percy's. I couldn't stay there. Dublin was a good compromise. Big city, lots of different faces and voices. I could lose myself in the crowd. I couldn't go back to Gorey either. Percy used to say his prayers at the Church of Ireland there. I made a donation in his name, and they put up a stained glass window showing the martyrdom of St. Stephen. Lord, lay not this sin to their charge. That first week in the city was a blur. I kept finding myself getting swept along by the crowd of people. It was the third day when I realised that I kept ending up outside the Jesuits in Leeson Street. So taking it as a sign, I went in. I found I could lean on them in a way I never could before. Brother Dermot in particular was infinitely kind and patient with me. It was through a suggestion of his that I realised the path for the rest of my life. We were talking about doctors one day, and he made a throwaway remark about how there weren't enough women in the profession. And I thought, why not? I was a paediatrician. Children, helping children, that was something that had been missing from my life. And Percy hadn't really shown much interest in the matter. I can't tell you how many times I walked over to the rotunda to see a patient. How many times I walked past the spot where Percy humiliated those men. I like to think that what I did for the children of Ireland made right what happened back then. What if I had just kept to myself? Kept my head down, married an Irishman, not dared to think how different life could be. I would have saved myself a lot of heartache. Ireland would be very grey indeed if we all thought like that. Life is about change, colour, seeing new things and faces. So wouldn't it be very boring if we couldn't do that at all?